I want to hit two other stories today. One has to do with the crime spike in New York City. So in New York City, we've had this discussion. We talked about in the show that in light of the Marxist Black Lives Matter organization, in light of their marches, in light of the just astonishing level of destruction, property destruction, arson, murder, they were permitted to engage in New York and cities around the country almost with impunity. And one of the demands of these Marxist anti-American organizations was to defund the police. So we have in New York already had the vote. It hasn't actually occurred yet. The funding hasn't shifted, but a vote to shift money away, massive amounts of money away from the police over to social services and midnight basketball. Who knows all the things that there are. But New York is in the middle of a crime spree, a horrible crime spree. So this is a headline, and it was on July 6th, and it's probably killing the New York Times to have to run this story. But they had in New York City over the weekend of July 6th, that's right after July 4th, 64 people shot, 10 dead. Spike in gun violence. A spike in gun violence in New York City. We have a spike in gun violence, not just because we've been talking about defunding police. In fact, I say the defunding hasn't really happened yet, but it's been voted upon, it hasn't happened. But what has happened is we've sent a signal, our society, our culture, the New York City, the city council has sent a signal of tolerance for violence, of refusal to enforce the law, of hatred of police, and of encouragement of violent action on the part of its citizens. This is what is happening in New York. The message is out from New York City, from liberal sources around this country. We're not really going to prosecute you. I mean, after all, you're the victims. The entire problem we have is the police. And so you have a message to the criminals of the country, nothing's really going to happen. We've now convinced Americans to mistrust the police, to support defunding the police. Have at it, crime spree. And you have both Mayor de Blasio in New York City saying, he's recently, I think we played it in the show yesterday or last week, but he recently said, Mayor de Blasio in New York City said, we really got to be careful. We got to crack down this COVID. We can't be spreading the virus. So no outdoor events. No, none of these things we always do in the summertime, outdoor concerts and outdoor, parades and all the kind of stuff. We're not doing any of that stuff. We can't have all the possible spreading of the virus. So we're not doing that. But we are going to permit the continued Black Lives Matter marches. And again, to be clear, the Black Lives Matter organization has been exposed as a Marxist organization, Marxist by its founders, Marxist meaning overthrow the government of America. Marxist still, because we have as the key fundraiser for Black Lives Matter, Susan Rosenberg, a former Weather Underground criminal whose organizations, along with her involvement, engaged in the murder of police officers, robbery, theft, collecting massive amounts of ammunition and weapons designed to take down the American government. She is raising money for the BLM. So you have the extremely radicalized BLM, you have the unwillingness of anyone on the left to even say that, to even say, some of this is a little crazy here, folks. So you have massive spike in crime in New York City. You had a most horrific incident which involved a child, a 1-year-old child in a stroller, shot to death during a cookout on outside New York City playground. 1-year-old child shot to death, shot in the stomach, died at the hospital later. There was a clip of this child's father. I decided not to play it because honestly, it's so sad, it's just unbearable. The poor guy is lamenting the loss of his child. So that this kind of violence, not just, this isn't just gangs shooting each other, and not that doesn't matter either. All violence is bad, but this is innocent people being shot up in New York City, a spike in crime, a message from the New York City mayor. We are never going to enforce, we're not tight on enforcing laws. We villainize the police, we criticize the police, we call out the police, we're endlessly calling the police too brutal, too racist, all of that emboldening the criminal element. That's all happening in New York City. Now let me have Matt the Wonderful play a clip for you from AOC, a member of the United States Congress, talking about the rise in crime in New York City.
So why is this uptick in crime happening? Well, let's think about it. Do we think this has to do with the fact that there's record unemployment in the United States right now? The fact that people are at a level of economic desperation that we have not seen since the Great Recession? Maybe this has to do with the fact that people aren't paying their rent and are scared to pay their rent. And so they go out and they need to feed their child and they don't have money. So you maybe have to, they're put in a position where they feel like they either need to shoplift some bread or go hungry that night. Maybe it's the fact that unemployment provisions have not been given to everyone. Maybe it's because of the fact that some people still haven't gotten their stimulus checks yet.
Okay, I actually want to make some really, really important points about that clip. The idiocy of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, pure, flat-out idiocy. I will start with a very simple observation that nobody who's out in the middle of the night shooting up and engaging in violent crime is out there because their kid is hungry and they need to steal a loaf of bread. The child murdered in a New York City playground, a 1-year-old shot while sitting in a stroller, was not shot because the people who pulled up to the park, jumped out of their car and opened fire, didn't have their unemployment check, didn't yet get their relief check under COVID, didn't get enough unemployment paid, couldn't pay their rent, so they had to go out and steal a loaf of bread. Obviously what she said is insane level stupid. I mean, I don't like to use the word stupid, but that's a nice word for her. Insane level idiocy out of her. But actually, there are far more important points to make beside that is inane on her part. One point is, you have to remember who got AOC elected, how she got there. AOC did go to college, majored in economics. What an embarrassment for that college. I think it was Boston University. She did go to college, but she was working as a bartender. She participated in a contest put on by the Justice Democrats. Justice Democrats, radical Marxist organization, looked around the country, tried to find Democrats holding office in Congress whom they viewed as not sufficiently radically Marxist, and then they targeted those sitting, relatively sane Democrats in congressional seats by finding someone to challenge them, someone who could be exciting, someone who could be a really good challenge for them. They literally had tryouts. Justice Democrats, radical Marxists, want to take down our government and our economic system. Justice Democrats held tryouts, and AOC won. She went to the tryout. Literally, her brother bragged. He had sent in her name and her video, and sure enough, she went to the tryout, and she sits there blathering, and she won the part. So she won the role. Justice Democrats, Marxist, anti-American organization will take down America, chose Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as the candidate. They molded her, they manipulated her, they worked with her to get her to the point that she could give voice to radical Marxist ideas, and yet using her extremely simplistic, childish, embarrassingly foolish manner in which she speaks. And I want to tell you something else about that. I think a lot of people listen, if you pay no attention to politics at all, and you heard someone make the argument, well, there's an uptick in crime because, we have unemployment, we have people didn't get their unemployment checks, some of the money from the stimulus didn't get out yet, and so people are forced to go out and steal a loaf of bread. And you actually think those are the facts on the ground? That's why there's an uptick in crime in New York City because of those factors? Then she kind of makes a lot of sense. You could imagine people saying, well, gee, she's making a good point. Somebody who's really hungry, yeah, they got to go get food, and maybe they might, steal a loaf of bread. We're really going to punish that. What she said has nothing to do with the facts on the ground. But to many people, she's persuasive. Ignorant people, she's persuasive. But the thing I really want to drive home to you today is this. She may have the mental presence. She speaks like a 5-year-old. I don't want to imitate her, but like a 5-year-old, simple-minded, just vacuous. She just radiates. I have no brain at all. But she is effective exactly because she speaks that way. She doesn't rant and rave like radical Marxists who are tearing down statues. She doesn't rant and rave like the people who are screaming in the face of the president or screaming in the face of other politicians. She talks in that 5-year-old manner, that like a 5-year-old would talk. Well, let's think about this. And she, in fact, both times, I don't know if I had that in the little clip we played, but both times she goes, let's think about this, and points to her head, and like a 5-year-old. That is all contrived. And you have to get this about her. I'm not saying anyone who listens to this show would vote for her, but understand everything about her is tactical, is maneuvering, is manipulation. Nothing about her is real. She didn't have Marxist tendencies. She didn't buy into the Marxist argument all the way along in her life. Or if she did, she never spoke up, never did a darn thing, never got involved in politics. But she was chosen by the Justice Democrats to be their voice. She was trained by them how to talk about the issues. So you see a rise in crime in New York City. And is it rise in crime because the American left is lawless and allows a rise in crime? Because the American left does not like to have law and order. They favor criminals over the safety of law-abiding people. But she is trained in her entire presence in Congress, her presence when she's giving little blathers like that. She's trained to manipulate. She's trained to dupe Americans into thinking that the entire problem in New York City and the crime problem has to do with the issues in whether or not we're getting sufficient funding to New York City residents. She's been trained to talk that way. She's been trained to try to convince you of that. So she's not, even though she sounds innocent and she sounds like just a sweet little person, she is trained to manipulate. Everything about her is contrived. It's really important to understand that because she is one of their best weapons in the Congress. You know, when she was elected for the first time in her life, 2018, she was elected, going off to Congress, a member of the Democrat Socialists of America, and she was almost like a little media darling. Certainly on the left, she was a darling. She's so pretty and she's so articulate, and she's really cool, and she's young, and she's Hispanic, and she connects with people. And so people got drawn into following her, and now you watch in Washington, the squad, they call them, the 4 first-year Democrat women who are members of Congress, all 4 of them, very radical, very leftist, but at the same time, able, as with her as their main spokesperson, able to convey radical, dangerous, horrible ideas in a Pollyanna 5-year-old childish way. And on top of that, she's been effective. She has been effective in Washington, both because of her ability and willingness to get her mug in front of the camera all the time, and because she's very effective at mocking anyone who dares to challenge anything, any piece of the radical left's agenda. Please understand about her. She's on a mission to bring about the Marxist overthrow of this country just as much as the Black Lives Matter. This is where she is. It's why she belongs to the Democrat Socialists of America. You cannot belong to the Democrat Socialists of America and believe in the founding ideas of America. It's one or the other. You cannot believe in socialism and believe in the freedoms guaranteed to America in our Constitution, in our Declaration, in our Constitution. They're polar opposites. You can't say, I'm a patriotic, I love America, and I want to bring Marxism here and take away the freedom of the American people. America is about freedom. Marxism is about destruction of your freedom. That's where she is. That's why she does those little pressers like that, and these little videos she puts out, because slowly she thinks, and she has been somewhat successful, eating away at the fabric of America, eating away at the love of America, eating away at the assumptions of millions of Americans that America is a good and noble and decent country, because Marxists will never get their way. They will never get their agenda if Americans continue to believe in the idea of America.